I used to think Christmas was about love, family, and togetherness. Warm lights, a decorated tree, laughter around the dinner table. But for the past 5 years, I spent every Christmas alone. While other families gathered for joy and celebration, mine slowly slipped away. Every December, my husband and my son would leave me behind, always with a new excuse. A friend needs help. There's an urgent errand. We'll be back soon. But they never came back, not on Christmas Day. At first, I believed them. I trusted them. Until one cold December morning, I decided to follow them. What I saw shattered everything I thought I knew about my life and about the people I loved most. This is the story of how one quiet Christmas morning uncovered years of secrets, betrayal, and a woman from my husband's past who never really left. If you've connected with this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more. Let's start our story. I remember our first Christmas together like it was yesterday. Snow had just begun to fall outside our tiny apartment window, soft and silent like a secret blessing. I had lit 3 cinnamon-scented candles on the windowsill, and the lights on our first little tree blinked unevenly, like they were trying their best to keep up with our joy. Everything was imperfect, but perfect in its own way. Mark, my husband, had burned the ham. He always said he could cook better than me, and I let him try that year. It came out black around the edges, but we laughed about it all night. We didn't have much, just each other, and our newborn son, Liam, who was barely 5 months old and slept through most of it. But I thought, this is happiness. This is how it's supposed to feel. Every year after that, I tried to recreate that moment. The same scent of cinnamon, the same string of tangled lights, the same recipe even though I cooked the ham from then on. Mark would help decorate the tree, holding Liam up so he could place the star on top as he got older. We took photos every year, one in front of the fireplace, always in matching pajamas, even when Liam started complaining about how itchy his were. I loved those traditions. I held onto them like they were pieces of a dream I never wanted to wake up from. And for years, it worked. Christmas was our thing. Our family's golden day. When work didn't matter. When life slowed down just enough to let love breathe. Mark would bring me my favorite peppermint mocha in bed, and Liam would always sneak down early to shake the presents. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. I used to think we were one of the lucky families. The kind that actually stayed close. The kind that had memories instead of regrets. I watched other people go through divorces, drifting apart, spending holidays in silence. I told myself that wouldn't be us. That we were different. That Mark loved me, and our son adored me, and that Christmas was proof of that. But now, looking back, I realize I was only seeing what I wanted to see. And the cracks had already started forming, quietly, slowly, underneath the glitter and smiles. It happened on Christmas morning, 3 years ago. I had woken up early, just like always, and crept downstairs in my slippers to start the coffee and turn on the tree lights. That soft glow, that quiet stillness before everyone wakes up, it was always my favorite part. I stood there for a moment, holding my mug close to my chest, breathing in the peppermint and coffee, letting the moment sink in. But something felt different that year. The house was still quiet long after it should have been filled with noise. No sound of Mark humming in the shower. No Liam bounding down the stairs like he always did, too excited to wait for presents. I went back upstairs and found Mark sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed. His coat was in his hands, not slung casually over a chair, but gripped tightly, like he was in a rush. He looked up at me, almost startled, and said, "Hey, I didn't want to wake you. I have to go out for a bit." I blinked. Now? On Christmas morning. He stood up and kissed my forehead. "Yeah, Jerry called. His car broke down. He's stranded on the highway, and it's snowing bad out there." I frowned. "Jerry? Your coworker, Jerry." "Yeah," he said quickly, not meeting my eyes. I told him I'd come help. "I won't be long." He walked out before I could ask anything else. I stood there, still in my robe, coffee cooling in my hands, trying to shake the unease crawling up the back of my neck. It wasn't just the sudden errand. It was the way he hadn't told me the night before. The way he avoided my gaze. The way he didn't take Liam with him, when usually they were inseparable on Christmas morning. An hour passed. Then two. Liam eventually came downstairs, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He looked around, confused. "Where's Dad?" "Helping a friend," I told him, forcing a smile. "He'll be back soon." But he wasn't. We opened the gifts without him. I saved his plate at breakfast, then put it away untouched. By late afternoon, I called his phone, but it went to voicemail. No update. No explanation. He finally returned after dark, smelling faintly of cologne and smoke, not from our fireplace, but something unfamiliar, something that didn't belong to our home. He looked tired, like he'd run a marathon. He kissed the top of my head and said, "Sorry I missed everything." Jerry needed more help than I thought. I wanted to believe him. I really did. I told myself not to be dramatic, not to read too much into it. But still, something in me quietly shifted that day. A small, almost invisible crack. Because Christmas wasn't supposed to feel like that. Not for us. The year after that, it happened again. Same time. Same story. Different excuse. This time, Mark said it was his uncle, sudden chest pains, nothing too serious, but he needed to check in, just in case. "It's probably indigestion," he said casually while zipping up his jacket. "But you know how Uncle Ron gets. Dramatic. If I don't go, he'll make it sound like I let him die." I stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding a wrapped box of Liam's new toy drone in my hand, still in my pajamas. "On Christmas morning again?" I asked quietly. He shrugged like it was out of his control. "It won't take long." I didn't argue. I didn't want to ruin the morning. Liam had already started tearing into his presents, and I didn't want the tension to touch him. So I just nodded, even though the unease from the year before was still there, curled up like a knot in my stomach. Mark didn't come back until dinner was almost cold. No text, no call, no sign of urgency or guilt when he finally walked through the door. Just a quick kiss on my cheek and a tired smile, as if that was enough to make everything normal again. By the third year, I didn't even ask. He didn't offer an explanation. Just got dressed early, mumbled something about someone needing help, and walked out the door with Liam following behind him. That time, it wasn't just a few hours. It was the whole day. I kept glancing at the front window, watching flakes of snow drift down while the presents sat untouched beneath the tree. I even set the table for 3 out of habit. Kept the food warm. Turned the Christmas music low, hoping maybe, just maybe, they'd walk in before it got dark. They didn't. When they finally returned, Liam ran upstairs without saying much. Mark gave me a quick smile, said something vague about traffic and losing track of time, and poured himself a drink. I didn't press him. I didn't have the energy. What hurt more than his absence was how casual it had become. The way it was no longer strange for him to be gone. The way Liam didn't even seem surprised anymore. The way our home felt less like a place of celebration and more like a waiting room. I started noticing smaller things, too. Like how Mark never let me see his phone anymore. How he seemed distracted even when he was home. How Liam, once so close to me, had begun pulling away, becoming quiet, secretive, like he was carrying something too heavy for a boy his age. And yet, I kept convincing myself it was just stress. Just life. Just something we'd get through, like every other couple. I still set the tree up early. I still baked the cookies and wrapped the gifts and laid out our matching pajamas. I still smiled for the photos, even when it was just me in front of the fireplace. But deep down I knew. Something was unraveling. It's strange how doubt creeps in. Not all at once, like a loud knock on the door. It comes in pieces, tiny moments that seem harmless at first, until they start stacking on top of each other, forming something heavier than you can ignore. I started noticing how Liam would look at me when I asked about their Christmas outings, like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. He'd shift in his seat, mumble something vague like, "We just went out for a bit," or "Dad said we'd be back soon," but plans changed. Always rushed. Always rehearsed. Like he'd been told not to go into detail. Mark, on the other hand, became more dismissive. If I asked, "Where did you go?" he'd say, "It's not important." If I said, "You missed dinner," he'd say, "It's just one day." It wasn't just Christmas anymore. It was birthdays too. Anniversary dinners. Even weekend mornings where I'd wake up to an empty bed and no explanation. At first, I tried to believe the best. He was busy. He was tired. He needed space. All the things people tell themselves when they're trying to make excuses for someone they love. But then I found the receipt. It was buried in the pocket of one of his coats, dry cleaning tags, a few crumpled receipts, nothing unusual. Except for one from a little Italian restaurant across town. Dated Christmas Day. A table for three. 3. I stared at it for a long time, my heart thudding in my chest. He had told me he and Liam had just driven around that day. That everything had been closed. But this place wasn't just open, it was somewhere we used to go years ago, back when we still made time for date nights. I didn't ask him about it. I wanted to, but I knew if I brought it up, he'd just find a way to twist it around. He always did. Say it was nothing. Say I was overthinking. Say I was making drama out of thin air. So I said nothing, and instead, I started paying closer attention. His phone was always face down. Locked. The password changed. He never used to hide things from me, not like that. If a message buzzed while I was near, he'd casually pick it up and walk out of the room. Always a reason. Just work. Just Liam's coach. Nothing important. One night, as he slept, I reached for the phone. My hands were trembling. I didn't even know what I was looking for, just some kind of proof that I wasn't going crazy, that my gut wasn't lying to me. But the phone didn't open. The code wasn't the one I knew. He'd changed it. Without a word. That was the moment I stopped lying to myself. The moment the illusion I had clung to for so long began to quietly, painfully dissolve into something real, something I couldn't unsee. The next Christmas came faster than I expected. By then, I had stopped decorating the house like I used to. The energy, the excitement, it just wasn't there. I still lit the tree more out of habit than hope, and I placed the same old star on top, even though it had a crack running down the side. I told myself I was doing it for Liam. But even he seemed distant, like he was going through the motions just to avoid questions. Mark was quieter that December. Not cold, exactly, just distracted. Always on his phone, always with that faraway look in his eyes like he was mentally somewhere else. He smiled when I spoke, but it never reached his eyes anymore. I had started to feel like a shadow in my own home, present, but unnoticed. And yet, I still played the role. I made the cinnamon rolls on Christmas Eve. I laid out the matching pajamas, even though Mark didn't bother to put his on. I wrapped the last few presents and placed them under the tree, hoping somehow that maybe this year would be different. That maybe he would stay. But that morning, he woke up early again. I pretended to still be asleep as I watched him get dressed in the dim light. He moved quietly, methodically, like he'd done this 100 times before. When he leaned over to kiss my forehead, I didn't flinch. I just waited until I heard the door close behind him and Liam. And then I got up. For the first time, I didn't sit by the window. I didn't make coffee. I didn't set the table. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and my silence. And I followed them. I didn't even know what I was going to say if I got caught. I didn't have a plan. I just knew that I couldn't keep living in the dark. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know where they were going, who they were meeting, what was more important than Christmas with me. I stayed far enough behind that they wouldn't notice me. Mark's car made a slow turn down the main road, past the stores and the church, heading toward the edge of town. I followed, fingers tight on the wheel, heart pounding so hard it felt like a second pulse in my neck. He didn't stop at any friend's house, didn't go to any emergency or any place that could pass for a good excuse. Instead, he turned into the parking lot of a small, cozy cafe tucked into a quiet street, one I hadn't seen in years. I parked a little farther down and waited, half hoping this was all a misunderstanding, that they'd grab coffee and go home. But then I saw them. Mark stepped out first, then Liam, and then a woman. She came out of the cafe with a tray in her hands, 3 cups balanced carefully, and a warm, practiced smile on her face. My breath caught. I knew that face. Even from a distance, I recognized her. Her name was Emily, Mark's first love. Emily. It had been over a decade since I'd heard her name spoken in our home, and even then, it was rare, just a passing memory, mentioned with a casual laugh. That was a long time ago kind of tone. Back when we were still in that early stage of love, the stage where you share everything, old photos, bad relationships, silly mistakes. She had been part of his past. A first love, a high school flame, the one he almost married before things fell apart. That's what he told me, and I had no reason to doubt him. But now, watching them from behind the foggy glass of my parked car, I realized something. Things hadn't fallen apart at all. At least, not for good. Because there she was, sitting across from my husband and my son, laughing like she belonged there. Like she'd always belonged there. I sat frozen, the engine still humming quietly beneath me, my hands clenched around the steering wheel. The cafe's windows gave me a perfect view. Mark reached for her hand across the table, her hand. Not Liam's. Not just a friendly touch. It was slow, familiar, intimate. And Liam, he wasn't surprised. He didn't look confused or uncomfortable. He was talking to her like she was part of his life. Like this had been happening for a while. That's when it hit me. He knew her. Not in the vague way a child knows a distant family friend, but in the way you know someone you've shared meals with, laughed with, maybe even hugged on the way out the door. And in that moment, something inside me shifted from confusion to clarity. This wasn't new. This wasn't a chance meeting or an old friend catching up over coffee. This was routine. I watched as Emily handed him a small wrapped gift. Nothing flashy, just simple, thoughtful. Liam opened it and smiled, and I saw her place her hand gently on his shoulder. Like a mother would. A cold wave of understanding washed over me. My husband hadn't just reconnected with an old flame. He had been bringing our son to see her, on Christmas. The very day meant for family. Meant for us. He had made me believe I was the one being overdramatic, while he carved out a secret tradition with another woman. And Liam, my sweet boy, had gone along with it. Maybe willingly. Maybe with questions of his own. But he never told me. Never said a word. Not even once. I sat there, barely breathing, as the 3 of them laughed together. A picture-perfect scene. Like a family. Except I was the one outside the window. Not invited. Not needed. Not even missed. By the time they left the cafe, the daylight had softened into a gray winter haze. I stayed parked, heart thudding like a warning drum in my chest, eyes fixed on them as they stepped into Mark's car, Emily lingering a moment longer to wave at Liam before turning and walking away, like she'd done it 100 times. I didn't follow them home. I needed a moment. To breathe. To think. To stop my hands from shaking. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but the shock wrapped around me too tightly. It was like I'd stepped outside of my own life and was watching it play out on a screen, some heartbreaking movie I couldn't pause. When I finally pulled into our driveway hours later, Mark's car was already there. The porch light was on. Inside, the tree still glowed and faint laughter came from the living room. I stood there for a moment before opening the door. Liam looked up from the couch, holding a controller in his hand. "Hey, Mom." I gave him a soft smile and walked past him. Mark was in the kitchen, sipping something from a mug, leaning casually against the counter like it was any other night. "Where were you?" I asked. He looked at me, a bit startled. "I texted you. Didn't you get it?" No, I said, eyes locked on his. And even if you had, that's not the point. He set the mug down. Okay, what's going on? I took a slow breath. I followed you today. Silence. His expression didn't change at first, but his shoulders stiffened, just slightly. I saw you, I said. I saw her. His jaw tightened, just enough to notice. Saw who? Emily. He looked away for the briefest second, just long enough to confirm everything I already knew. You followed me? I had to, I said, voice low. You've been disappearing every Christmas for years. Every time I asked, you lied. Liam lied. I had no choice. He rubbed his hands together like he was cold. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I asked, feeling the frustration finally crack through the numbness. You've been spending Christmas Day with your ex. Behind my back. With our son. You took him there, year after year, and left me at home wondering what I did wrong. She's going through a hard time, he said suddenly. She's alone. Liam, he wanted to meet her. It wasn't my idea, not at first. I stared at him. Are you hearing yourself right now? She's not a threat, he added quickly. There's nothing romantic going on. I laughed, bitter and low. Then why lie? Why hide it from me if there's nothing to be ashamed of? His silence said more than any answer could. You were building something behind my back, I whispered, while I was hanging stockings and baking cookies and pretending everything was fine. He stepped toward me. It's not like that. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said quietly. I think I've just stopped pretending. He looked at me then, really looked. And, for the first time, I saw it, fear. Not anger. Not defiance. Just fear that the little world he'd carefully hidden had finally been exposed. The tension hung in the air like an unbearable weight after the confrontation. My words were still ringing in my ears, but there was a strange quietness now. The kind of quiet you get after everything shatters and you're left in the silence of your own realization. Mark didn't say anything more. He just stood there, looking at me like I had become a stranger. I could feel the walls he'd built between us getting higher, the gap widening with each passing second. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him how long it had been going on, when it started, why he'd hidden it for so long. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way his eyes avoided mine, or the way he clenched his jaw like he was bracing for the worst. I could see it now, he wasn't going to fight for this. Not really. And maybe I wasn't either. The longer we stood there, the more hollow the space around us felt. The love we had shared, once so vibrant and full of laughter, now seemed far away. It wasn't just the affair, it was everything that had led up to it. All the small betrayals, the lies, the years I had spent believing in something that wasn't real. I turned and walked away from him. I needed to breathe, to get out of that suffocating space. Liam was in his room when I passed by. His door was cracked open, and I could hear the faint sound of a video game, but the moment he saw me, his expression shifted. He put down the controller and stood up, uncertain, like he had been waiting for this moment. Mom, are you okay? His voice cracked a little, and that hit me harder than anything Mark had said. I nodded, but I couldn't speak. Instead, I walked into the living room and sat down, my hands trembling as I folded them in my lap. The reality of it all was sinking in. Liam had known. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Enough that he had kept quiet. Enough that he had participated in this secret world where Emily was more than just a memory. She was a fixture in their lives, in my son's life, and I had been kept in the dark. I wanted to ask him, to demand the truth. But my heart ached too much. How could I force him to tell me what had been happening? How could I ask him to betray his father when, at the end of the day, he was still a child caught in the middle? But my silence didn't last long. Liam sat next to me, his presence a mix of comfort and pain. He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. Mom, I didn't want you to get hurt. His voice was so small, so unsure. I didn't think it was my place. My chest tightened. It wasn't your fault. I know, but I didn't want you to be mad at me. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought it would break everything. I thought maybe it wasn't so bad. I swallowed hard. How long has this been going on, Liam? How many Christmases has he done this? Liam shifted uncomfortably, his hands twisting together in his lap. A few. Maybe 3. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't know what it would do to you. I closed my eyes, the weight of it all crashing down on me. My own son, caught between loyalty to his father and the painful truth of what was happening. I couldn't blame him. He was a child, and he had been given a responsibility he shouldn't have had to carry. It's not your fault, baby, I said softly, reaching out to him. None of this is your fault. But the damage was already done. The cracks in our family weren't just in Mark and me anymore. They were in Liam, too. His innocence, his sense of security, was shattered by the very people who should have protected him. I could see it in his eyes, the guilt, the confusion, the regret. He had known something was wrong but didn't know how to fix it. Mark's absence in the living room was suffocating, but it was even more suffocating in the space between Liam and me. We were together, but the connection had already started to unravel. The foundation of our trust was shaking, and there was no way to put it back together. The silence stretched on as the reality of everything settled in, and the festive decorations in the corner of the room suddenly seemed absurd. Christmas wasn't supposed to feel like this. There was no warmth, no joy, only the cold, bitter truth. Healing doesn't begin with grand gestures. It doesn't start with apologies or promises to do better. It starts with silence, with space, and understanding that things have shifted and no one is quite the same anymore. The days after that Christmas were strange. There was a heaviness in the house that no amount of cleaning or redecorating could remove. The walls seemed to press in on me, and every corner I turned felt like a reminder of what had been lost. Mark kept his distance. He tried to speak sometimes, but his words never felt real, just empty attempts at filling the silence. Every time he spoke, it felt like a lie waiting to unravel. Liam, too, was distant in his own way. He still came to me for comfort, still asked for advice, but it was different. The innocence he once had was gone, replaced by something more complicated, something I couldn't quite place. I saw him watching Mark, trying to gauge his reaction, trying to understand if everything would be okay, but he couldn't read the same signs anymore. And I couldn't help him with that. The first few days, I let myself feel the hurt. I let the anger rise, let it consume me, and I let it go. Not for Mark, but for me. I needed to shed that weight, to stop carrying it around like a coat that didn't belong. I stopped pretending I didn't see the lies, stopped pretending that everything could go back to normal. Because it couldn't. I started spending more time alone, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I walked around the neighborhood on quiet mornings, taking in the stillness, letting the cold air fill my lungs. I spent hours in the kitchen, baking not for anyone else, but for me. I had forgotten how much peace I found in the simple act of measuring, mixing, creating something with my hands. It gave me a sense of control when everything else felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I stopped waiting for Mark to fix it, to make it better. I stopped looking for the old versions of him and started to look for the new ones. The ones I didn't know how to love. Maybe I still couldn't. But I was trying to understand, trying to find a way to heal without depending on him to heal me. And it was in those quiet moments that I began to see a shift, not in him, but in me. I wasn't waiting for an apology anymore. I wasn't waiting for him to come around and prove that he could be the man I thought he was. I was learning how to let go of the image of him I had built in my mind, piece by piece. Liam, too, was learning. I could see it in the way he held himself. He wasn't as eager to please, as afraid to speak up. Slowly, his confidence was coming back. He started to ask me about things he never had before, questions about what I needed, what I wanted, and how I was feeling. He was no longer the child who had been hiding behind the veil of his father's lies. He was a young man, trying to make sense of a world that had turned upside down. We spent more time together, Just the two of us. No distractions. No pressure. We took walks, watched movies, and talked about anything and everything. Some days, there was still an awkwardness between us. I knew that it would take time to undo the damage that had been done. But it felt like we were building something again, slowly, from the ground up. Mark, meanwhile, remained distant. He didn't fight for me the way I thought he would. He didn't beg for forgiveness or offer promises that felt insincere. But he didn't walk away either. He was still here, physically, but emotionally, he was absent. I didn't know how much longer I could live like that. I didn't know if I wanted to, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't desperate for an answer. I wasn't seeking validation from anyone. I had stopped asking myself, what now, and started asking, what do I want? The healing was quiet. It wasn't dramatic. But it was there, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through a storm. Slowly, without warning, it began to feel like something new was possible, something that didn't depend on fixing the past, but on moving forward with whatever truth we had left. I woke up one morning, the sun creeping through the blinds, casting soft light across the room, and realized something. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't drowning in uncertainty. I wasn't clinging to memories or chasing what I thought I had lost. The heaviness I'd been carrying was still there, but it didn't control me anymore. It didn't define me. I didn't need Mark to make it better. I didn't need him to make any promises or apologize for things that had already broken beyond repair. I was learning to walk on my own again, and it wasn't easy. It was like trying to breathe after being underwater for too long, but it was real. It was mine. Liam was growing, too. The distance between us had begun to close. He wasn't a little boy anymore, but he still needed me in ways that no one else could fill. We spent time together, yes, but it was different now. It wasn't about avoiding the pain or pretending everything was fine. It was about finding new ways to connect, to be honest with each other in ways we never had before. There were still days when the silence between us felt heavy, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. Mark, on the other hand, remained where he was, stuck in the shadows of his own regrets, a man who couldn't seem to pull himself together enough to apologize or to come back. And maybe that's what I needed to accept. Maybe he would never be the man I had hoped for, the man I once believed I could love without question. But in this new space, I didn't need him to be. The morning routines had changed. The way I approached each day was different. I didn't wait for Mark to show up to make things right, to pull us back together. I stopped asking for things that couldn't be given. Instead, I started filling the spaces with things that nourished me, simple things, but things that mattered. I began to remember who I was before all the chaos, before the lies and the heartbreak, before I was a wife and a mother and a woman who had forgotten what it meant to take care of herself. I made time for my own passions again. The things I had let go of when I'd been too focused on keeping everyone else happy. I painted again, even if it was just a quick sketch in the mornings before work. I read books that had nothing to do with anyone else's needs, stories that made me laugh or cry for reasons that were my own. I reconnected with old friends, those whose voices didn't remind me of what had been lost, but of what was still there, waiting to be found. Liam began to open up more, too. He wasn't burdened by the secrecy anymore, and I could see the change in him. He laughed more. He asked questions about things that mattered to him. He started to explore his own interests without feeling like he had to live up to someone else's expectations. It was a relief to see him like this, free of the weight I had unknowingly placed on him. Mark came and went. His presence in the house was like a ghost of the man I used to know. But I had stopped expecting things from him. I had stopped needing him to be my anchor. I had learned to become my own. Some days, I still thought about the Christmases that had been stolen, the things I had missed, the things I would never get back. But then I remembered something important. I hadn't lost myself. I hadn't lost Liam, and I hadn't lost the future I could still build, one where I was the person I needed to be, not the person I had been waiting for someone else to make me. A new beginning wasn't about forgetting. It wasn't about wiping the slate clean and pretending nothing had happened. It was about accepting what was, what could have been, and what still was possible. It was about stepping into the life I had left, with or without him. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. As the days go by, we learn to heal in our own way, step by step, even when the path feels uncertain. Sometimes it takes losing something to find ourselves again, and through it all, we come to realize that the strength we need to move forward was within us all along. What happens next is up to us, and we can choose to create a new beginning, no matter how hard the past may have been. If you've connected with this story, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more. We share stories that speak to the heart and the truth of life's most complex emotions. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching and take care of yourselves.